Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Trustee Learning Programme. Tonight, we're talking about finance in tray. Before I pass over to Liz Pepler, who's chairing our expert panel tonight, you've got a few bits of housekeeping from me. So you will have noticed that the session is being recorded. You will be sent the recording afterwards. The recording will also go onto YouTube. If you put something in the chat, that will appear on the Zoom link, which is how you will receive the recording, but it won't appear on YouTube. You've been muted on arrival. Please stay muted unless Liz comes to you for a comment or a question. That helps keep the sound nice and clear. We've enabled closed captions at our end, so if you'd like the subtitles, please click CC or closed captions on your device. Session content is specific to England and Wales, although some of the principles are absolutely applicable to Scotland and Northern Ireland, and you're very, very welcome. Please do check local regulations. Please feel free to use the chat to share experiences. We're actually taking pre-submitted questions tonight, so we may not take any questions from the chat, but we'd be really pleased to have your reflections. And then finally, a really huge thank you to Rathbones Investment Management. We've got James on the panel tonight from Rathbones. Rathbones support keeps this whole strand of the Trustee Learning Programme completely free of charge to attend, which is really important to getting on board. So thank you very much, Rathbones. Now, before I hand over to Liz, I just wanted to tell you about how we've selected questions this evening. So when you booked for this session, you will have seen that you had the option to submit a question if you wanted to. Now, we have picked questions that are on topic, that we know to have really wide relevance based on our experience. And we've also picked questions that have been repeatedly asked. So, for example, there was about 5 or 6 questions on reserves, for example. We haven't picked the question if it's too specific, if it's identifiable, if we don't really have enough information from the question to be able to answer it, or if it's too complex. And apologies in advance that we can't answer all questions, although you may hear a question that was similar to yours, but isn't yours exactly because somebody else had exactly the same thought as you. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Liz.
Thank you, Penny. Thank you. Really, really nice to be here. I've been looking forward to this. I think, what was the invitation? So the invitation was to share, and I'm reading this out, real life trustee finance issues. What's keeping you awake at night? What's worrying you about your organisation's finances? And what are the current finance issues which make you secretly eye roll at trustee meetings? So you always kind of brace when you wait, so the invitation goes out, you wait for the questions to come back in, and then you brace and you kind of look at them through a squint, thinking what's going to come back. Because it's kind of a temperature check. It's a temperature check on what everyone's thinking and feeling. And unsurprisingly, the questions that came back get to the heart of some really, really challenging issues that we deal with as trustees. And I don't think any of them, if I'm honest, has got an easy answer. And you would expect that, because if they had easy answers, we wouldn't be submitting them. So really, really looking forward to this. We're going to start with a round of introductions. So please, James, can you introduce yourself, name, pronouns, professional background, and your board's commitments?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's great to be here. So my name is James Garbett. I'm an investment director with Rathbones, and I am based up in our office in Newcastle upon Tyne. I've been managing investments for charities for 26 years now, actually, of all shapes and sizes. The majority of my clients tend to be sort of endowment funds and grant makers, but I work across the sectors, health, education, you know, to name a couple, so all shapes and sizes. I'm also a charity trustee. I was the vice chair of Tyne and Wear Archive and Museums Development Trust, but retired. I've done my time in 2021, and I'm now a trustee of the Rothley Trust, which is a local northeastern-based grant-making endowment fund as well. So I like to think I've got a bit of experience on both sides of the table from finance and trustee, but it doesn't mean I know anything, but I'm quite good at listening to people. So I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone else has got to say.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks so much, James. It's so nice to have you. Christy, hi.
Hi there, Christy Eden-Green. I am currently working at the Bank of England, so I'm head of financial planning and analysis. Relatively recently joined the bank, joined 8 months ago. Prior to that, have over 20 years experience in financial services. I am currently the trustee of a social mobility charity called Making the Leap. Fabulous charity. They do work with a lot of young people in terms of finding them, building their confidence for opportunities within the workplace, but they also do a lot of advocacy work in terms of working with corporates. Social mobility is a collective goal. So I have been on the board for 6 years. I've been treasurer because about half of that time, and that's quite a common thing when you're a qualified accountant, is to when you're on the board, you get tapped to be the treasurer if you have an accounting background. So that happened.
Very difficult to join the board as a finance professional and not be treasurer, isn't it? One day.
Indeed.
One day. Thanks, Christy. Alison, hi.
Hello, hi everybody. My name's Alison Cowan, pronouns she, her. I am not a finance person at all. I'm currently vice chair of the New Economics Foundation, which is a charity and think tank focused on driving real world change through innovative economic solutions, economic ideas. I also sit on the finance committee at Samaritans. Previously, I was vice chair at Mind, and I sat on their finance and their audit committee. So in my past day job, I was not a finance person, but I was often a fundraising person, so had to have a good grasp on finances. I'm sure that'll come up later. And I have worked at director level for a number of charities over the years, specialising in change, in particularly strategic change. That's
Lovely.
me. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Alison. John, hi.
Yeah, hi. Hello, everyone. So my name is John O'Brien, and I run an organisation called Community Accounting Plus, or CA Plus for short. We are accounting people, a team of 16 of us based in Nottingham, roughly. And we are accounting people, so we do accounts for normal stuff. But the unusual thing is we're a charity as well ourselves. So I have trustees, and we have funding, and we have to do reports and all that. So we have to do what all our clients do, because all our clients, we work with about 400 to 500 organisations at any one time. And most of those would be charities, some community interest companies as well. And our goal as a charity is to help charities, mainly, not public benefit organisations really, sort themselves out so that we deal with the boring accounting stuff so that they can get on and do what they really want to be doing. And that's what we do. So I do a lot of training and support and advice and setting up systems, working with trustees and so forth. We've been doing it a very long time. And I began life in, prior to this, I did something completely different. And I was very much a reluctant volunteer, and I got arm twisted to do the finances in the charity I was working within. And that led to this. There you go.
You fell into it and then you fell in love with it, John.
Well, I won't comment
on a good day, on a good day with a fair wind. Brilliant. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so before we get into the questions that were submitted, maybe we could just share, we've all had busy days, we've come in from different places, and we're now sitting here thinking about different financial challenges we have when we're sitting on the board of an organisation, working with an organisation. What's currently on your mind? Christy, if I come to you first, what's the first thing that springs to mind? What are you grappling with at the moment?
So I think one of the responsibilities of the board, and particularly falls on a finance professional, is appointing the auditors. So we're a relatively large charity. Our accounts have to be audited. And I think that charities find themselves in an interesting position because, then they don't have the luxury of having deep pockets for auditors. And I think the other side of that is actually charity finances can be quite specialized. So I think trying to get an audit firm who will partner with the charity in the right way, with that deep knowledge at the right cost, is a challenge. And it's a process hopefully you don't have to go through too often, but that's top of my mind at the moment.
Yeah, big process. Thank you, Christy. James, what's top of your mind at the moment?
3 words: investment policy statement.
Okay.
What we're doing with so many of our clients at the moment is reviewing those.
Yeah.
So Charity Commission issued new guidance, well, updated guidance, CC14 investment matters, just sort of towards the middle to end of last year. And charities who invest have a requirement to have an investment policy statement. As I'm sure a lot of the chat that will come out from the chat tonight is, write it down. Make sure everything you do is written down properly and can be properly justified and argued. So what we're doing in particular with investment policy statements are looking at things like environmental, social governance issues, or the moniker responsible investment. So we invest for many clients in many different companies from across the world. And so those charities want to understand how we are behaving with those companies that we invest in. How do we engage with them? How do we vote on the trustee's behalf as well? Are we being responsible as investors? So yeah, investment policy statement, 3 words.
Really interesting. Thank you, James. John, what's on your mind at the moment?
Well, you may have heard in the introduction I said we're based in Nottingham, and Nottingham's been in the news lately. And but I don't know if you all know this, but the entire grant aid program of Nottingham City Council, all of it, is being abolished from the 1st of April. So there are hundreds and hundreds of organisations that rely on that, and so it's very much at the small charity world that I live in. And you know, we're talking about people that lunch clubs are going to lose the £5,000 they get every year, and that could be terminal, just for £5,000. So it's about, well, what can I do to help people? I can't give them money, but what can we do to help? And how can we give people the basic tools at that level of doing a cash flow, working out a budget, trying to tap up other streams of income, that kind of thing? Real basic sort of how you're going to get through this very sad situation. Anyway, that's dominating at the moment.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that, John. That really is sad. That has such an impact, doesn't it? That must really materially affect your day to day.
Yeah, charity sector is amazingly tough.
Yes,
there are some bankers present. Please do forgive me if I say this, but one of the lines I say is, the last time we had a crisis and we gave all the money to the banks a few years ago, the voluntary sector survived. You know, people are incredibly resilient, incredibly tough, and volunteers sort of, you know, go the extra mile and all that. But this might be challenging, I think. And we're yet to see the fallout, of course, and what happens down the road. But that's rather dominating things around this part of town at the moment.
Yeah.
Anyway, move on.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Send in solidarity. Alison, what's on your mind?
So not too far removed from that, it's about modelling the financial future.
Yes.
And looking at likelihood of different income streams, especially grant and trust income streams, coming to an end. Lots of grant makers are refocusing how they give away money, if they give away money. So modelling what the future might look like, and with both an optimistic and a pessimistic lens, so that if different things come to fruition, we're not caught on the hop, and that we know in advance if we have to make difficult decisions. And I think that's common for a lot of large and medium-sized charities at the moment, as well as small charities, because a lot of the major funders are really shifting the way they do things. So strategic financial modelling, which is a very grand way of saying, what do we do if the worst happens?
Yeah. Thank you, Alison. That resonates with me. So I'm an independent finance and governance consultant and work mainly with charities, small charities with an income up to £1 million, and yes, modelling the future, forecasting, trying to prepare where we can and build that resilience comes up all the time. Thank you all. We're going to dive into the questions now. Question 1. How do we, and I'm going to come to you first, please, Christy. How do we set up the right level of reserves, Christy?
Yeah, I think you alluded to it in the beginning, is like, it's a common question, and every charity is different. And so I think that different charities will have different requirements or views on what is the right level of reserve for their particular charity. I think if you read the broad guidelines, it's 3 to 6 months worth of costs But I would say it depends on the risk tolerance of the charity. I think it comes back to, and it's something that Alison just said there about financial modelling, and so getting a good grip of the forecast, what's coming, what's committed cost, what are things, what income streams are you expecting to come in, and how quickly do they come in? So just having a good sense of that forecasted cash flow is something that I think it's so key to the responsibilities of not just the treasurer and the finance committee, but all the trustees. And I think that, while, and you'll come to this later, but, some of the trustees that don't have a financial background, then there's a lot to be said for asking the right questions, because people who have that objectivity around what was the spending, what's the historical spending, and how can that define what is required going forward so the charity doesn't get into trouble? What are the committed costs? What level of staff are they looking to employ that will create those committed costs? And all of those things are backbones on how you look at what the charity has as their risk tolerance for what the right reserves are. I don't think there's a right answer. I happily open it up to the other panelists on whether they have views and experience from their side, but I would say it's different for each charity.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. Yes, please,
Yeah,
John.
just I completely agree with what Christy's saying, and again, I've already mentioned writing it down, but I think throughout it all, it's kind of thinking when you're setting reserves, it's making sure at the end of the day you've got a decent, well-written, cogent policy that proves resilience, that it can be supportive for funders, for beneficiaries, just to prove that you've done your work, basically. But I guess throughout all, firstly, making sure you got your reserves properly sort of categorized. Do you understand what they are?
Yes.
Unrestricted, designated,
Yes.
restricted, whatever it might be. Do you know what they're for? And if you sort of think of reserves as a shock absorber, as Christy says, do you understand your risks? Can you try and predict when you're talking about, as Alison mentioned before, around strategic modeling, whether you're a large charity or a tiny charity, can you predict the unpredictable? No. So there's no right or wrong answer here. But the old adage goes, as Christy says, sort of 3, 6, 12 months modeling. If the catastrophic happens to your charity, how much would it cost to wind it up in an orderly fashion? Would turn the lights out at the end of the day when all the staff have been paid off and all the debts have been paid off and everything's been done. What's that number? That's a good starting point.
And so 2 things leap out at me there. The shock absorber, absolutely. They buy us time, don't they, reserves? And reserves are, let's just clarify now, the technical definition of reserves. If you look at CC 19, Charity Commission Guidance, which is called reserves and resilience, so two sides of that one coin. Reserves are unrestricted funds after we've deducted fixed assets for charitable usage, designated funds, any program related investments, and any other liabilities. So if anyone's interested in exploring reserves, Penny's put CC 19, a link to the Charity Commission guidance in the chat, which will take you to what's actually needed of trustees when thinking of drafting and updating your reserves policy. And that shock absorber analogy I really, really love. And also what I really love about that, James, thank you, is that maybe we have a range. Maybe we have a minimum reserve requirement, which would be the closing down costs if there's lots of precarity in the mix, and that's an evergreen threat. And then maybe we have a bit in the middle, which is, plan for the worst, prepare for the best. Is that the saying?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I guess the pandemic is the ultimate test of the unforeseen, isn't it? And everyone and through all their walks of life have had their finances tested through that period of shock. So it's just trying to quantify. I guess it's impossible, but what kind of visibility do you have of your income streams, of your funding profiles? And then also your expenditure. We've all seen our costs go through the roof during the last couple of years as well. And trying to make sense of it is really hard, which means there's no right or wrong answer at the end of the day. And you have to be flexible. Today's policy could be completely redundant in 12 months' time if something happens. So keep reviewing it and keep talking to your board.
Yes, it's not a dusty policy that sits in the drawer, is it? And Christy, thank you. I just want to draw out one point you made. You said quite embedded in lots of other great stuff that it's not just the preserve of the treasurer, and that it's for the whole board. Can you just say a little bit more about that, please? I think that's so important when we're talking about reserves.
Yeah, I think that when we do, I chair the finance committee, and I think that in some ways there may be a tendency for some of the trustees who have every board is made up of lots of different skills, and I come to the board with a finance background, but I think sometimes there is a tendency almost to leave the finances to the finance committee or leave it to the finance person. But I do think that, and I know there's a question coming up around this, but, I do think it is almost incumbent on the treasurer and those with a finance background to educate and take on the journey the other trustees that don't necessarily have that experience. And while it might mean something to me and I might be thinking of it a certain way, then sharing that kind of insight to the broader benefit of all trustees is important, because at the end of the day, like it is all trustees' responsibility. We all sign off on the accounts. So I think it's a tough one because a lot of trustees are balancing many different commitments, and getting their focus on the right ones, the important ones, is not always easy.
Yeah, there's so much to do. Thank you. But it is, we are jointly and collectively responsible. And thank you. I think that's a really valuable point. And the best questions I've ever had from trustees are generally, with all respect to everyone, from the non-finance trustees, actually. So be the curious trustee. Alison, which brings us to question 2. So when we talk about reserves, we don't talk about reserves for very long before we end up talking about, well, how do we build them? And so the second question is, the easy one is, how do you set the right level? The hard one is, how do you actually build them? How can we increase unrestricted reserves when overall turnover grows, but when we don't have enough strong individual giving or unrestricted income streams, in brackets, incomes mainly from grants, statutory income? How, with your extensive income generating background, what's the answer? And when you've answered this, write the book and you'll have your steady income stream for your
Absolutely. I shall wave a magic wand.
Yes.
This is always the really tough bit of fundraising, as I'm sure lots of people listening know. Fundraising is an art and a science, and it can take a very long time to build up sustained unrestricted income streams. I think there's a number of things one can do. The very first thing that I encourage people to do is do a pie chart of your income and look at how big the pieces of the pie are. So by different income streams, note whether they're restricted or unrestricted, and have a look at that balance. What you want is a really healthy balance, so that there are, they don't have to be equal pieces of the pie, but roughly the same size. If you've got more than half just coming from one source, then that is a greatly increased risk. And I think we've just heard an example of how suddenly, if a funding stream stops like that, and it's where you get all your money, I've seen a number of charities go through that for different reasons. So there's something about being aware of where you are now and what you have, and what it looks like, and being really honest about that. And then it's what else is at your disposal. So there's a range of things. There's the things that you have control over, the things you don't have control over. So the things you have control over are how you allocate your overheads. So when you are bidding for funding, making sure that you allocate your overheads in a realistic way and with the right numbers in. It sounds so obvious, but I'm particularly thinking of an organisation that that was charging out its services at less than it actually cost to deliver them. And that's, you know, that happens. So be really clear about how much it really costs you to deliver what you do. And then be honest with funders about how you're allocating that. Most funders are really happy to have a conversation, and they want to know that you are financially viable and sustainable. Nobody wants charities to close their doors. So there's something about the allocation of overheads, which then could free up free up unrestricted income. There are all sorts of different ways that we can be clever. So looking at the mix of income streams, exploring joint funding, looking at matched giving, looking at whether there's an opportunity to develop social enterprise. There's definitely, one of the things that people really forget is donor engagement is the sort of posh word for it. Looking after the people that give you money.
Yes.
You'd be amazed. It sounds like such a simple, obvious thing, but you need to thank and love and look after the people that give you money, so that they will give you that money again.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to go back to them.
Yeah. Thanks. So sorry.
Yeah. So final word,
Yeah.
legacies.
Yes.
Everybody forgets legacies.
And actually, if you look at the data at the moment, because of the cost of living crisis, donations going down, legacy is not going down. So yeah, I mean, if you're an organisation that can attract legacy funding, that's one of the areas that's still got that return, isn't it? And the full cost recovery, when you talk about overhead absorption, allocation to funding bids, full cost recovery. And so if you're on the call and you're thinking about how do we actually do that calculation to calculate the full cost, so it's not just the direct cost, you've got that fair and reasonable share of overheads as well to recover the full cost. There's some great guidance out there, and the best one I found, if you're a starter, if you're new to it, is the National Lottery Community Fund. Just Google it, National Lottery Community Fund full cost recovery guide. It even walks you through percentages if you haven't done them for a while, and it's a really helpful guide. Yeah, start with full cost recovery. That is a break-even strategy, and then bring in all those other income streams that you mentioned, Alison. Thank you. Really rich answer. John, you look at it all, but if Alison, if when we talk about fundraising, we're talking about the top of the profit and loss, the income and expenditure statement. And when we talk about finance, maybe, I mean, it's crude, we're talking about the bottom bit. What else would you add to that? How do organisations build reserves? What would you add?
Firstly, I'd sort of echo what's been said so far. It is difficult. I think back to our very early years when we started out, we had 40 quid in the petty cash tin, and that was it. And we set a 5-year target to build up a reserve to between 3 and 6 months.
Yeah.
So we gave ourselves a time and a target, and we managed that and kept an eye on it.
Yeah.
And we did the kind of things we talked about. We diversified our income streams. We tried to do stuff that we could control more. We had some serious conversation with some funders actually, and there are funders out there who will say to you, "Oh no, we're not going to fund any overheads. We're only funding direct costs." In which case, I'd say to them, "Well, give them my phone number, and I can give them a right old talking to about how ridiculous that is, because someone's got to pay for the cleaning and the heating, you know, kind of thing." So be tough sometimes with funders. Contracts, remember, any funding people get through a contract, if it strictly is a contract, then what you do with the money is your business, not, you know, so long as you deliver the contract and it's £10,000 or whatever it is, well, fine, charge them £10,000 and, you know, be clever with how you account for it. Pay your staff 8,000, not 10. Then you can save some money. So contracts always a good thing to do. And also, I find that most funders, I don't know if there's any funders listening to this, hope not. Most funders, if they give you £20,000 to work with the youth of, I don't know, St Anne's or whatever it is in Nottingham, so long as you do the work, then if you do a report that says we spent 20,000, they think fine. If you do a report that says we spent 19,000, they say, oh, flip me, we don't really want £1,000 back. You know, are you sure? So it's amazing how it's not cheating, it's just playing the game, I think, in that you make sure that you allocate your costs. You've talked about full cost recovery, allocation of overage. You allocate your costs so that you spend 20,000. You don't spend 21 because you haven't got 21. You don't spend 19 because that's you're losing out. So as long as you don't cheat across the board, you just get a bit, you play the funding game, because the funders don't want the money back and they just want to know mainly that you've done the work. So you have to be a bit clever with how you do it. And last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up, is that sometimes I come across groups who have massive spreadsheets, very clever things, and they have timesheets from all their staff, and they spend hours and hours and hours working out, oh, this train fare here, we ought to split it 10% there, 8.2% there, 9% there, because that's what the spreadsheet says we should do. And at the end of the year, the manager looks at it and says, hang on a minute, no, we spent all that, it's wrong. Make it 20 grand. Okay, click, 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 made it 20 grand. So don't waste time micromanaging the allocation of your costs, because it's all going to get changed anyway at the end.
Yeah, I call that paperclip accounting.
Yeah,
and I think you've got some great videos on your website around full cost recovery and doing overheads.
Yeah,
there's
if you want to find CA Plus, there's a few tools there, budgeting tools, and they're based on the full cost recovery principles.
And they're really, really, really clear. And absolutely, we don't cheat, but there is something about managing spend as you go and not having a surprise at year end with an overspend or an underspend. And that's another way that you can build your financial resilience. Just be on top of the numbers every month, I think. Really super helpful. Thank you, John. Thank you, Alison. Could talk about that for a long time. Time won't permit. So I'm moving on to question 3. James, this is such a great question. How much do we need in the bank to consider investing it elsewhere? So those organisations that are fortunate, maybe they've got multi-year funding, maybe their income is a bit bigger, have got cash reserves. At what point does it start to be a meaningful consideration to invest it elsewhere?
I'd love to give you a number, but I can't.
That's what we want, James.
Do you know, I've been asked, I get asked this question a lot, as you might expect, and it's for different reasons. So, coming through the financial crisis and out of the financial crisis when interest rates were zero for, a decade or so, and inflation was low as well. But, charities sat there earning nothing on cash in the bank and thinking, well, should we be doing something else with it? Flip forward, and here we are now. You can get some income from cash in the bank, but inflation's eating it away at the real value, the spending value. So circumstances change. But in terms of, I'll talk about the investment in financially as well. But, thinking back to something Alison was talking about, well, maybe there's other ways of investing it, such as in a fundraising strategy. Maybe you shouldn't, maybe that's a good way. What's the best way of maximizing your return? It doesn't have to be through investment. He said talking himself out of a job. It could be through a proper fundraising strategy at the end of the day. But for the purposes of what I know a little bit about in terms of investment, well, understand your risks, I would say, as the first starting point. And I'm trying not to be jargonistic, and please do tell me to shut up, but 3 things really that we look at. Firstly, when we're talking to trustee boards or executive teams, it's understanding their attitude to taking risk. Yep. How do you feel about the ups and downs? How do you feel about being on the roller coaster ride? Because you see at the bottom of every financial promotion, the value of your investment may go up and down, and there's no certainty for anything in the future. How do you feel about that? So if you are willing to commit capital to hopefully get a better return, understand the roller coaster ride you're on. And secondly, on that, it's understanding your capacity for loss. And by that, so how much money can you afford to lose without it damaging the day-to-day operations of your charity? And that could be both in terms of capital, but also in terms of income as well. So if you have an investment portfolio, how do you feel if it's lost 20% of its value? Is that catastrophic? Can you actually stomach it? Does that affect your funding streams? If there's no problem, then maybe you can afford to take some risk with it. The third thing we look at is knowledge and experience. And again, in a world of investment dominated by jargon, do you actually understand what it is that you are investing in? And do you understand the terminology behind it? And that's where we can come on in terms of training. Going back to the sort of point I made earlier about reserve strategy, sort of looking at it in 3 boxes, I would say. Thinking about, 1 box, you've got your lights out money, the money that you need there, if you had to shut the shutters, how much is that figure? Hopefully, you never have to touch that. So maybe you can take a bit of risk with that and try and protect its purchasing power. Inflation is the key risk to that. Box at the other end, cash flow. That's the money you need for operational stuff. And actually, that should be in cash. And frankly, you need your hands on it. You can't afford to take risk with that. And maybe there's that pot in the middle, which is a flex, because you come through your budgeting. Maybe you can commit more to the long-term pot. Maybe you need more to plug a gap in short term. So that's a very long-winded way of saying I haven't got a clue what the number is.
Okay.
But there are plans in place to be able to plan for it. And at the end of the day, he said, as an investment manager, don't be afraid to ask.
Thank you. I am disappointed that there isn't a number, but that's okay, because what I really love is that typology. Okay, so you might have your lights out fund, you might need your cash flow, and then the bit in the middle. And I think the Charities Aid Foundation has a blog or something where they use the larder fridge freezer analogy, which I think is not the same, but I like the 3-part approach, because what I really love about it is it encourages us as trustees to think strategically, to think over the long term, to think about the near-term immediate risk, to think about the long-term aims and aspirations and intent, and then what we're going to do to get from A to B. And I think that's relevant whether we have large cash reserves or not. Actually, I think that long-term thinking, I think sometimes we're myopic. I think we have fixed term contracts. I think we have short grants. And I think that can create a myopia, whereas actually, I've only ever worked with investments in one organization where I was finance director for a grant maker. And it was a small grant maker, 20 million, I think, and which is small in your world, isn't it? And but what was the light bulb for me was actually just choose a time horizon where you're thinking far longer term than you would.
Yeah. And don't forget, at the end of the day, there are products available from investment providers, and we've got one too, where you can buy into a fund with a few £1,000s.
Great. Okay.
So it's not a case of saying, don't come near the investment industry unless you've got £1 million. You can pick off the shelf stuff, but very often when you are dealing in a sort of, in a few £1,000s, you're kind of doing it yourself. And that comes with risk as well. So understand, as a board or as the executive team, the risk that you're taking on board from that. And as I say, testing those 3 things, such as capacity for loss, attitude risk, and understanding it, knowledge and experience, is a good starting point.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I did go on your website earlier to look at what resources were available, and there's just a lot on there. Even if you're a smaller organization and you're thinking through some of the opportunities, maybe start with is it CC14 on
investment
guidance on investments, and then have a dig around on Rathbone's website, because there's a lot of really useful stuff on there. Thank you, James. I'm going to move on to you, John. Coming back to you, John. And this is it's a slight change of tack, but not completely, because actually what we've been talking about so far are some of the strategic challenges we have as trustees in balancing immediate need with longer term impact, and the needs of current beneficiaries with future beneficiaries, and building resilience with reserves, and using cash, making it work harder for us. So supposing we've done all that and we've got it all done perfectly, John, we now need the financial information at board level to be able to work out what does good look like. Is what are it's rings on a tree, are the decisions that we're taking us towards a more financially sustainable future, more financially resilient future? What information do we need to be able to take those decisions? And how do we do it in a way where we're not overwhelming the CEO of the charity with requests for too much? What are your thoughts on that?
A few thoughts, and I really could waffle on for hours about this, but I'll try and be very brief. First thing is, most boards only know what they're told by the staff. So the chief exec, i.e. me and my trustees, they only know what I tell them. but a lot of software nowadays you can have read-only access. So if you are a trustee and you think, I quite like the idea of finances, you probably on your online software will be able to have read-only access, so you can go in and have a nose about without doing any damage. So some trustees might want that as well. Trustees, what they say goes. They're in charge, not me. I'm just an employee. So what trustees want goes. My advice normally is you need something which you should have your reports a week in advance of the meeting. Never present them on the night. That's just not a non-starter. And I think there's a balance between too much and too little. I used to be on the board which got papers a week in advance, but the papers were about 130 pages thick and incredibly detailed and complicated, and I just couldn't do it. I didn't have the time. And so my board would get, 3 or 4 basic reports, a budget variance report, number 1. Another little rule of mine is don't go over one side of A4. If you have to, in the old days when we used to have paper, if you had to put sellotape on anything for a report, don't go there. It's too detailed. So one side of A4, please. The budget variance report. I'm going to say a balance sheet, but that's only for the larger charities. For a smaller charity, it might just be a statement which says this is what we've got in the bank today, everybody, and this is what we had last month, perhaps something like that. So to know about the reserves position, if you like. But and crucially, a report which shows the cost of doing what you do. I spend a lot of my time sorting out systems with groups, and so many forget that the point of a charity is to do things. And the point of a board on the finance side would be to work out, well, how much did it cost us to do those things, and were they adequately financed, and are we financing things well? So it's what I call the fund report, and it's not all the donors, it's the funds and the activities. It's more of an activity-based kind of report that we want. So having those kind of things, and you can always get more detail later. So if one of my trustees ever asked me, how much did we spend on postage? First, I'd think, why on earth are they asking that? That's an odd question. But what I'd really say is, I'll tell you straight away, Frank, and then I could either log in live or I can send them an email later. But that's not the kind of detail. I was once at a board, my final point, I was once at a board meeting, and for half an hour they argued among themselves about the price of the paper that was used in a publication they had. And they were, should they have this quality or that quality paper? And it was nothing to do with that. Of course, it was all about power. And then 3 months later, the charity collapsed because all its funding was ending anyway. But they forgot to talk about that. Just focus upon the minute. Anyway, so it's a balance between too much detail, too little. Board sets the rules. Try and have something, a standard set pattern. If you can, stick to it. My board's had the same kind of reports for 20, 30 years now, more or less. Don't know if that's sufficient.
I think that's, thank you. I call that Titanicing, when we're all obsessing over the smallest number while the ship's going down. And we've all been in that board meeting, haven't we? We've all been in that board meeting. I really love your one pager. I think Brexit was on page, D-Day was on one page, wasn't it? We can get most charities on one page. And it's big picture. And for me, long term, what's the future? Really helpful. Thank you, John. Christy, I'm going to come to you because I would love to invite you to answer the next question, but also to see with your hat, you've got a financial planning analysis hat on at the Bank of England. What would you add to that? What does the board need? What would you add really briefly? And then I'll move on to the next question. I'm interested to hear what you might add to that.
Yeah, so I was actually going to jump in and
Right,
on
okay.
this anyway. But when I first joined the board, there was a lot of the board meeting taken up by the numbers, and it prevented the board being strategic. So we spend 3/4 of the meeting talking about numbers, asking questions about individual lines of the costs, and it just detracted from what the board should be concentrating on. So when I then took on the finance committee role, I found it a really useful pause to actually say to the rest of the board, we're going to take this and we're going to analyze it at the finance committee. If people are interested to join that, if you have specific questions, then either come along and we will do it there and we'll dive into the numbers, because people do take that seriously. And there are a number of the trustees who were keen to understand the numbers. So we did it in that forum. So I actually think subcommittees, and the finance subcommittee in particular, is a useful one to have to prevent the discussions being had at the main board meeting. And as well, I think the level of reporting that was being taken to the board was too much. And so the more you give, the more questions you're going to get, which is useful. But I also think that having, what ended up was a one-page summary with the appendix at the back for those who wanted to know, because it is useful to know historical information, but the forecast information is really important in terms of getting ahead of what's coming.
Resilience is what we do next, isn't it? And yeah, thank you, Christy. And moving on to the next question, how, and it's tied to this point about what information do we ask of the executive, what information do we need, how can trustees fully support staff and hold them to account when we don't have any financial knowledge, when there's an asymmetry of knowledge. What can we do as trustees to exercise, to fulfill our fiduciary duties?
I actually think trustees are in a perfect position to ask questions, and so therefore by bringing questions without that deep knowledge, without being in the detail, gives you that perfect objectivity to be able to ask questions on things that may not be so obvious when you're in the detail. So somehow bringing commercial experience or into your role as the trustee, I think, is incredibly important. It sort of challenges, it's an opportunity to challenge and partner in trying to get the right objectives, keep the charity on track with their vision and their mission. I think it's a perfect sort of objective view to have by being a trustee. Yeah, I think that my experience with the charity is that the charity, the employees work so hard, and they're stretched in so many different ways, and sometimes by helping them think about doing things differently, like risk registers and the financial reporting and things like that may not actually be in their skill set. Trustees have an opportunity to bring their outside skill set and possibly more commercial skill set to help the trustee. And I know that the board are not necessarily operational, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't be spending the time to go in and help and to possibly mentor or give advice, look at processes or answer questions if they have any, but it's an opportunity to challenge, I think.
Thank you.
Liz, can I
yeah,
just
please
chip
do,
in
John.
very quickly? Be brave and just ask the obvious question. I'm working with a charity right now. In their accounting reports, there are some very strange numbers, and those numbers have been there since 2020, I think it was, when they were typed in by someone, and they've been spectacularly wrong ever since. And no one has asked the question. No one said, why is there a minus 37,000 in something called deferred accruals?
Yes.
Ask the question, because it was wrong. Okay.
Yeah, be the curious trustee. I couldn't agree with that more. I think we should know all the numbers on the balance sheet. It's controversial. I get a lot of pushback for that, but actually most of the risk is on the balance sheet. And I think, someone should know all the numbers and be the curious trustee. I hear that, John. I couldn't agree more, actually. And thank you, Christy. Would anyone else like to add how, when there's that, and James, is there anything you would add? And then Alison, I'm going to come to you in a second on the really thorny question of, okay, how do we actually engage people now? But James, is there anything you would add? Because every time I've sat through investment reports at board level, I find them rather fascinating, but I don't always fully understand everything. And honestly, if you were to tell me it's all fine, I would struggle to know exactly what to ask, to work out, is it all really fine? Or do you just have a greater risk tolerance and appetite than I do?
I guess, in terms of, is it all fine? Well, how are you being measured and what you're
Yeah.
being measured against? What are your expectations
Yeah.
of that performance as well? Make sure it's tangible, and properly measurable and presented in a way that's clear, not just when it's written down, but also in the way it's presented. Face-to-face meetings are kind of crucial, even if they're online as well. So don't be afraid to say, I don't understand what you're talking about. I'm too long in the tooth. I actually quite like it when someone says, stop, I don't understand. Because then you cut through the rubbish and you can just sort of trying to explain it in plain English. I think as well, in terms of, if staff, if members of staff don't feel they have the financial expertise, training is available. We have training courses online. You don't need to book into a webinar. There's podcasts. There's all kinds of stuff that is out there and available. And I think if trustees on boards are coming from a commercial world and maybe have some experience of this, they should be able to point members of staff in the right direction, to offer that support too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is lifelong learning, actually. I think no matter what seat you're around the trustee table, there's always something that we're still learning. And that's why getting on board is so amazing, because it manages to cover all of this stuff. Right. Okay. Thank you, James. Alison, so we've cracked the issue of reserves, and we've now got wonderful reserves that we're now investing and making the money work really hard for us, and we're reporting that we are the best trustee board. We're reporting it all in a way where it's accessible to everyone in a risk managed way, looking firmly forward. How do we now engage? And its specific question, Alison, is how do you engage a board who don't really want to engage in the charity's finances, and for incredibly valid reasons? We didn't come here to build the perfect finance system. We came to change the world, make communities better, oceans cleaner, people's lives stronger. How are we going to actually engage people in this critical, and what I would say, most interesting issue?
Well, as I mentioned a pie chart earlier, I'm a big fan of visualization. And I think remembering that people take on information in different ways, people relate to information in different ways, is really, really important in terms of accessibility and inclusion, because not everybody, when faced with a spreadsheet, is going to be able to engage with it. So understanding the makeup of your board and understanding whether accessibility is an issue for people, I think is really important. Big picture, I think it's about relating financial discussions to your mission and impact. So what's the point of having the discussion? We're having the discussion because it's going to impact in these ways. These are the areas where we have to tighten our belt. These are the areas we think we might want to invest some more in. So always being really focused on the strategic point of that area of the finances. I think simplifying information into those strategic insights. So if there's a way of dividing up the numbers to be really clear about what they mean in terms of impact in the real world. And then the bottom line is, as trustees, we have legal responsibilities for financial oversight. So it never hurts if people aren't engaged. It never hurts to remind them. So there can be a little bit of carrot and stick. You make it accessible, you make it easy to engage with, you encourage open and honest conversation, but at the same time, remind everybody around the table that this is actually part of their job.
I love that, Alison. Thank you. And in terms of creating the conditions, I mean, what gets in the way of that? And in terms of creating the conditions around the board table, where does that, which seat, which hat does that fall on, do you think? Are there particular roles around this is such a leading question, are there particular roles around the table that are able to create the conditions for that open, challenging conversation where we're not all just politely nodding?
I think it's a lot of it is down to the chair of the committee or the board, and the way that they hold the meetings and the tone and the kind of the culture and the values of that group of people. I think the treasurer, it has a lot of a big role to play in terms of making sure that they don't default to perhaps financial jargon or make it seem like it's us and them in terms of finance people and non-finance people. And then as individual board members, it's all our responsibility to foster that culture of kind of open and honest engagement, not being afraid to ask questions, but to remember, when is the question for the benefit of the charity, and when is it just because you're curious? And be really clear about that. If it's just curiosity, do you need to take up board time to ask that question? I think that's always something to kind of keep front of mind.
Can I just in terms of, I couldn't agree more. The role of the chair is absolutely key in that one, and also, Christy mentioned subcommittees before, and I noticed a question pop up in the chat earlier. It was about how do you risk attitude 14 different trustees when they've all got 14 different opinions, was one of the questions. Well, it's a willing few, and this is the role of the subcommittee, really, that the trustee, the chair needs to make sure that the board is structured correctly in an efficient way, and that the other trustees that aren't directly involved trust the others to do the right work for them. So I think it's all about board structure at the end of the day.
Thank you. I agree with both of you. I was fortunate to be treasurer trustee of the Association of Chairs till recently, and learned many things. But what I learned with that, the biggest takeaway for me, was that it's the chair that turns a group of really great trustees into an effective board and creates those conditions for constructive, open, honest discussion. Okay, thank you, everyone. We're going to do a quick round now, because that's the end of the questions, and we could talk forever more, but we don't have that luxury. We're going to do a really quick round. Your top number one skill or behaviour needed now, given all the challenges that we know and all the opportunities that we know, to be an effective board member, which is slightly different maybe to being an effective trustee. John, may I start with you, please?
I'm really torn. I'm going to say faithfulness.
You have to. We're a sector of rebels, John.
No. I'll stick with one. I'll say faithfulness. And I try to remember to end every board meeting I have with my trustees by thanking them. And it's not just, oh, thanks everyone, see you next time. It's I mean, I'm just amazed these people are voluntarily giving up their time to deal with this beep situation that I'm presenting them with. And it's tough. And I think, especially during the tougher times when, grants are getting cut and what have you, and it's challenging out there, to have board members who are faithful and stick by you is number one for me.
Lovely word. Thanks, John. Alison, what would you say?
I think in the current climate, it's all about adaptability, and not being wedded to the old ways of doing things, but thinking really clearly with a clear eye on the future. And that can include having a willingness to learn in order to be adaptable, and to always make sure that that you are there with your focus on the right things for those moments that you're in the board meeting.
Yeah. We don't get a lot of time, do we, over the course of a year? Thank you, Alison. James, what's your one word?
One word. Listen.
One skill or behaviour.
Yeah, well, look, I would say, don't, for all levels, don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
And be willing to listen to the answers.
Yes.
As simple as that.
Active listening. Yes, thank you so much, James. And Christy, you have final speaker advantage, but we do need to give Penny at least 90 seconds. So it's not a huge advantage. What would be your top?
I think I would say support, because I think comes support with collaboration and openness, the problem solving for charities in that environment where there is constant change and they are required to be innovative. And I think being pro charity and being support gives you that position of also then building on influencing in the right directions.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much, Christy. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for the really cracking questions that did get to the heart of nutty issues. Penny, I'm going to hand back to you now.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you, James, John, Christy and Alison. Really, really interesting hour. Thank you. I've posted the evaluation form in the chat. Please let us know what you thought of this session. You'll also find a section in the form for other suggestions. That's how we source all of these suggestions by trustees and people who work with trustees telling us what they think they would find useful. So please do use that. Have a look at our trustee learning programme. This session is one session of it, and our colleague Daisy has been busy this very day putting our new sessions for the summer term live onto Eventbrite, so do have a browse there. And as I say, all completely free of charge. If you're able to make a donation, we'd be absolutely delighted. And do check out Getting On Board. I put our website there to see how else we can help you. And then I'd love to end on a big thank you to Rathbones Investment Management, who sponsored this session and the whole of our finance strand as part of the Trustee Learning Programme. And we really hope to see you at further sessions. So good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thanks all.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye bye.